Hi, Dominique.
Hello, Alan.
How are you today?
How are you? Fine. You?
I'm good. So it's nice to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to tell something about what I lived up until now.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. So today my guest is Dominique de Werra. He's an emeritus professor of OR at EPFL in Switzerland. His research fields include combinatorial optimization, graph theory, scheduling, and timetabling. He conducted a collection of applied and theoretical OR projects with a number of industrial partners. Dominique has published over 200 papers and has also written and edited several books. He's an associate editor of Discrete Applied Mathematics, Discrete Mathematics, Annals of OR, and a member of a dozen of editorial boards of international journals. From 1990 to 2000, he was Vice-President of EPFL, and he was President of IFORS from 2010 to 2012, President of EURO from 1987 to 1998, and President of the Swiss OR Society from 1985 to 1986. In 1995, he was awarded the Euro Gold Medal. Dominique has obtained honorary degrees from the University of Paris, the Technical University of Poznan, and the University of Fribourg. In 2012, he was awarded the Euro Distinguished Service Medal. In addition, he was a member of many committees in various countries of Europe and America. Dominique, such an honor to have you here today. Thanks once again for accepting the invitation.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so let's start. So Dominique, you were born in 1942 in Switzerland. Where exactly?
I was born in Lausanne. In fact, my parents came from the neighboring canton Valais, 60 kilometers away, and they came to Lausanne, so I am a second-generation immigrant.
Ah, okay.
In Lausanne.
Right. And you mentioned your parents. What did they do for a living?
My father was an obstetrician, and my mother took care of her 3 children, of which I'm the oldest. Yeah.
Okay, you have a brother and 1 sister, right?
Brother and sister.
Did they follow a similar path to yours?
Not at all. No one studied mathematics, and they didn't have any ideas to do that. And
right.
they're quite happy without mathematics and without OR.
Okay. How did you first get into numbers?
Because I understood that the knowledge of counting could be extremely useful in the practical life. And the example is that when I was very small, like 3 years old perhaps, I was allowed to leave my apartment at the 3rd floor, 4th floor building to go to some relatives which live not far away. And I could not count. I was too small to reach the buttons of the elevator. So when I came back home, I usually went up to the 4th floor, opened the door and noticed that it was not my apartment. So I went down 1 floor. That was a good one. And from that moment, every time I went up to 4 and then down to 3, while counting would have saved me some exhausting steps in the staircase, but I could not count at that time.
Very nice.
But I was motivated to learn counting.
Very good. And what did you used to do in your early years?
Well, I had no talent for music, a moderate talent for sports in practice, although I like sports in theory. And I liked skiing and mountain hiking, and I enjoyed the vacations, the summer vacations, because we met all the cousins of the family in the mountain chalet my grandparents had here and there. It was fantastic time, and we always believed that it would never end. But unfortunately, the fall came and we had to go back to school, and that was a tragedy every time.
Okay. Yeah, I know you worked with sports scheduling. That's why I was about to ask about sports, but you already answered. You like drawing from an early age, right?
Yes, I enjoyed having a piece of paper, pencil, and glue, and paintings, and I draw for hours and hours. I used to draw my professors at school also, and I used this also when I was in the army to avoid some hard tasks, because they needed my drawing ability to prepare some documents, and I was very happy to avoid difficult jobs because I liked drawing simply.
What were your musical preferences back then? You told me you don't play any musical instrument, but what do you like to listen to in those days?
Although I tried cello, but that was a tragedy, so I stopped rather soon. And my father tried to get me interested in Wagner's mythology and operas when I was 5 years old. So I knew some of the main themes in Wagner's operas. I enjoyed that, but I forgot the mythology. And then when I grew up, I forgot about all this. And it's only when I was close to 80 that I went back to the opera that I liked it again. But that's all. So I had just classical music. My father was listening a lot to music. He was playing clarinet himself. So it was mainly classical music. Yeah.
Yes. I have interviewed Karen Ordal recently, and she plays the clarinet, and she was kind enough to perform during our interview a Beatles song. So in case you're interested, or the viewers and listeners, I recommend that you take a look or listen to that episode.
Thank God, because you don't have to listen to an experiment of cello from here.
So were you already into math in your school years?
Not especially. I was interested in everything, in languages. In fact, I studied humanities and I got some prizes, but it was in Latin and orthography, but nothing is mathematics at that time. So.
Okay, so drawing, languages, but still no math in a serious manner, let's say. And why did you decide to study physics engineering at university?
Because that was the Ecole Polytechnique in Lausanne, and they offered programs in engineering, all kinds of engineering, including physics engineering. And that was the direction where there was most mathematics. So I chose that one because it looked interesting. And I was not especially interested in physics, but the only way to have mathematics was to go through that curriculum. So.
All right. So you mentioned that you wanted something that was close to math, but why exactly? Because, I mean, you had different interests in school.
Oh, because I wanted to become an engineer. I don't know why, but then that was the best way. The school was in Lausanne, so it was very convenient not to have to move. At that time, student mobility was not as fashionable as it is now. So the normal program was to stay at home if possible and to go to the closest goods institution you could find, and EPFL was not too bad, so I finished there. So my physics was in fact at the end nuclear reactor physics. I studied moderators in these, and I had to modelize this with Bessel functions and strange animals like that. So it was more or less mathematics, but kind of because in physics I hated the electronic equipment because it never worked. I did not understand anything about electronics. So I wanted something which could be done without electronics. And math was a good option for that.
Oh, okay. In 1960, you began your studies in physics engineering at EPFL. And in 1965, you earned the equivalent of a master's degree. What was your final research project about?
It was precisely in nuclear reactor physics. That was the way where they had the smallest amount of physical experimentations and labs. So that was just a bit of electronics. I had some friends in my group which could help me for electronics, and I managed to get out with a degree in nuclear reactor physics without understanding too much about electronics. So.
Right. And what did you do in the months that followed your graduation?
I had a huge army program which was already prepared, so I had to get ready to spend more than 2 years in the army. And besides that, I worked a few months as a researcher in the Center for Nuclear Research in Switzerland, which was in Wirenlingen, and where I had to use some polynomials, it was mathematics again, to modelize what was happening in reactors they had at that time.
You mentioned that you spent 2 years in the army. What did you do besides drawing?
In the army, I was in artillery, so it wasn't so unpleasant. In fact, it was a federal artillery federal. So I met lots of people speaking German and Italian. So to learn languages, it was a perfect place. except that we learned a special language. The army language is not the one you can use in a classroom, but I learned a bit about these languages, and I made many good friends, and the physical training was excellent. For 2 years, we were just running and walking at the end 100 kilometers in one shot. So it was excellent for the health. So I did sports for all my life during these 2 years. And the drawing, I mentioned that before, they had to prepare documents. Sometimes they needed some cartoons. So I was always ready to use my drawing abilities to help them and to avoid other works in the army, which were more unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. So when did you first hear about OR, and how did the opportunity to pursue a PhD in the field come about?
Okay. So that happened just after I finished the army. I was appointed as a research assistant at EPFL and the Institute for Applied Mathematics. And there they were just interested in numerical analysis, and they did some simulation. And my future supervisor, Charles Blanc, who is, by the way, a specialist of Euler and who was chairing the committee in charge of translating from Latin into French or German the complete works of Euler. So it took him a life, but they did it. So this Charles Blanc happened to be open to many new ideas and many new fields. He attended an ORSA meeting in 1966 in the summer, where he met Bob Makel, who was chairing ORSA at that time. And he was convinced that OR had to be taught at EPFL, and he would, when coming back, do whatever he could to promote the field of OR in an institution where they were not very keen on introducing new things like OR, for instance, and computer science. But anyway, he succeeded in doing that. And when I started, so he told me, well, you should study OR. It looks interesting. He gave me the book of Claude Berge, the first one, and the French translation of the book of Ford Falkerson. And that's how it started. And then I played with graph. I enjoyed that. And I was ready to start a PhD after a few months having these books in hands.
Mm-hmm. So you started your PhD in 1966, just like my dad, and completed it in 1969, unlike my dad, who finished in 1971. Could you share a bit about your PhD work on solving school timetabling problems with graph theory?
Yes, at that time we had lots of schools who had more and more problems in constructing their timetables because they were just increasing in size and getting difficult requirements to handle. So they came to EPFL and asked, well, you're an Institute of Mathematics, could you help us in doing that? So that's how it started. So my supervisor told me, okay, you should perhaps use the theory of graphs to solve some practical school timetabling problems. You have a nice field of experiments with all these schools coming asking for help. So why don't you work on this? And that's how it started. I worked on that. I managed to solve some of these problems, and more came. And the question was raised to do that for EPFL itself. And of course, the people were not too happy. They told us that the data are difficult to collect and we don't know exactly how we could collect them. In fact, they didn't like this because they didn't want to lose their jobs. So we could never construct the school timetables of EPFL. But when one of my students at that time, Alain Hertz, started to work on that, he was allowed to work to get the timetables data from Zurich. And that's how it started. We made the timetabling for Zurich for the exam sessions, and it worked quite well, and they were quite happy. But nevertheless, it never worked in Lausanne.
Yes. So it's like a bittersweet feeling. But were you the first to make the connection between school timetabling and graph theory?
Well, at that time, there was not much literature about that topic here. So I think I may have been among the first ones who have used systematically graph theory, in particular network flows, to solve some school timetabling problems. Yeah, probably.
Okay. In 1969, you attended a summer school that made a tremendous impression on you. There, you met a constellation of stars like George Dantzig, Martin Beale, Ralph Comrie, Fred Glover, Phil Wolfe, Claude Berge, Peter Hammer, Bernard Roy, Mike Florian, who was a subject to a guest, to name a few. What an event, right?
Yes, that was a fantastic impression. You forgot to mention Egon Balázs, whom I met also there. So
okay.
collection is almost complete. So I was just a young PhD student. I just finished, in fact. I was very surprised to see that all these people whose names I had seen in books really existed. I felt like in a museum seeing all these people. They were alive there and they were swimming and eating and playing like others. I couldn't believe it. And it was an opportunity for me to get acquainted with some of these people. So the contacts with Claude Berge, Fred Glover, and Peter Hammer in particular were continued for years after that famous meeting.
Wow.
And also I had a chance to meet Don Clough, who was going to be my boss a few months later, because after the PhD, I wrote lots of letters to get some appointment somewhere in the States or in Canada. And Don Clough is one of those who answered positively. So I ended up to Don Clough's place in Waterloo after this meeting of 69, which had been really an experiment which changed my life, I could say.
Right. And he was a very special person, right? It seems that his house was full of kids.
He was a fantastic person, and he and his wife, Marilou, they had 8 children, and 6 were adopted. That's the first one, the last one were theirs. And they adopted also children who had to go under surgery because they could afford it. And these people were extremely jealous. It was also quite a lesson in my life to have seen these people giving everything they could to help others, because they even took us in their house when we arrived in Canada without an apartment. No, and it was 10 people plus 3 coming more. So very impressive.
Mm-hmm. And he died too soon, right?
He died of a heart attack, yes, a few years later when I had already left Waterloo. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Dominique, in Waterloo, you interacted with other legends such as Jack Edmonds, Vašek Chvátal, who was a subject to guest, Adrian Bondi, W.T. Tutt, Bill Pulleyblanc, not to mention visitors like Ray Fulkerson, Albert Tucker, Frank Harari, and even the astronomer Fred Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang in 1949. He did not believe the Big Bang happened, by the way. Anyway, so do you have any anecdotes to share about them?
Well, first I should say that I was very glad because Don Clough, when I arrived there, saw that I had a landed immigrant visa. He wanted really to remain in Canada. And so he immediately offered me a position of assistant professor in his department. It was the Department of Management Science, close to the math faculty. Okay, so to see these people, I was, of course, very impressed by Jack Edmonds. I had lots of contact with him. He was just 1 floor below my office, and I spent much time there. In fact, he's the one who invited me to give my first talk in a conference. It was in Dallas, and I went there, and I was not afraid because I felt as if I were protected by Jack Edmonds, so I did not have the fear that people have for the first talk in the conference. I felt quite comfortable, and I thank him for that once more. So he taught me a lot. We talked about cardinality balancing problems in matroid intersections and lots of things. And that's also in his office that I met Vašek Chvátal for the first time, and many other, Adrian Bondi and all those people. With Bill Pulleyblanc, I had some interactions also. In fact, in OR, there is a famous problem called the marriage problem. And with him and Paolo Tot and Silvano Martello, we coined the divorce problem. And the divorce problem was the following. You had between couples, man I and woman J, some coefficient Cij, which was the average expected duration of a wedding. So to have a nice situation, we would like that most people divorce at about the same time so that they are all available on the market at the same time for remarriage. And it turns out that you have to find a solution to a kind of assignment problem where you want the maximum of the cost to be as close as possible to the minimum which is used. It's balanced optimization problem. And we call it the divorce problem. And we published this paper with these people after having had this discussion in Waterloo. Okay, and Frank Honorary also, it's funny to say that I had some exchange of mails with Frank Honorary during months and months, and he kept writing to me, I like your work, I like your work. And then the opportunity came one day, he visited Waterloo and I could meet him. And I remember his disappointment when he discovered that in spite of my first name, I was not a girl. And from that day, he didn't tell me anymore that he liked my work so much. So.
The fantastic story.
That was my last contact with him. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. It's great to hear that you met all of these people. And I mean, feeling protected by Jack Edmonds, it's quite a thing, right? He's quite tall and quite a character too.
But I felt protected, but I was very impressed by him, of course, that he was a giant, and he's still a giant, and I felt even safer being protected by a giant.
Yeah. Yes. Dominique, one thing that's very interesting is that while you were in Waterloo, my dad was also there because he was doing his PhD there. So I don't know if you guys had, stumbled upon each other.
Probably without knowing it, because...
Yeah. He was in the chemistry department.
Yeah. So I had not too many contacts with the chemistry department, unfortunately. I was just going between the management science and the CNO, Combinatorial and Optimization department.
Yeah. But like to picture that you guys were in the same university at the same time, it's just mind-boggling to me. It's great. And your time in Waterloo ended up being very brief, and in 1971 you returned to Switzerland to work at EPFL. Why did you stay longer in Waterloo?
We would have stayed longer because I had a good position. My wife also, she was working as a marriage counselor in the city of Kitchener. I have a Canadian son who was born there. So we wanted to remain, but the opportunity came. We hesitated a long time. We had a piece of paper in our dining room and we put the pros and the cons, and we had two columns which were equally filled. So we almost flipped the coin and say, okay, let's try and go back to Switzerland since there's a position. There is not too often positions at EPFL. Let's take it. We came to Switzerland and the first period was rather difficult. We had lived quite independently, without family too close. It was kind of fantastic. I don't hate family at all, but suddenly we were quite close again and we were not used to that because we started to appreciate independence. And anyway, we stayed in Switzerland and we remained for years and years and we never moved from Switzerland, except that we went to Waterloo during the summers as often as possible with the whole family to give summer courses and to see all our friends, which we still have there.
Right.
I was appointed to an OR position. I had never had a course in OR except the few hours I took in Waterloo to listen to Jack Edmonds and to other colleagues like that. But it was quite challenging to start a curriculum, to organize a curriculum in OR, having never had that as a field of study.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you mentioned that your son was born in Kitchener in 1970, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Yes.
My brother was also born in Kitchener in 1970.
Probably same hospital. Yes.
Probably same hospital. Yeah. That's nice. So, upon returning to your home country, did you find a welcoming environment in the EPFL Math Department?
Well, what could I say? In fact, even if an OR curriculum was going to start, I had troubles in convincing our pure mathematicians colleagues that we could be useful also, that we had our place in this department. So it took some time before we were accepted. It was not only me, but it was also the people in computer science who at that time happened to be in the Math Department, which existed at that time. So it was hard, and we had to convince them little by little that we were at our right place there. And I remember that there was one good argument which convinced at least the specialists in probability, because someday we had an optimal stopping rule problem in a two-parameter problem. And the probabilist people did not know how to solve it to show that the stopping rule had a certain structure which was nice. And it turned out that Les Trotter was spending some time at EPFL at that time, and with him and with Robert Dalang, who is now professor at EPFL, we found a solution by using the fact that the certain polytope of the independent sets of a graph had integer vertices. And although they did not like the graphs, people had to admit that discrete mathematics could sometimes be useful even for their nice continuous problems. And that's how the war ended, I should say.
Wow. And the early days of war at EPFL coincided with the rise of Green parties across Europe. One of your students, who was associated with the Green Party of Switzerland, even became the mayor of Lausanne, correct?
Yes, that's Daniel Brella. In fact, he was an excellent student who stopped his studies and went to politics because he was the first member of a Green Party elected to a national parliament in the whole of Europe. He was number one in Europe in the national parliament. So he was very good. They appreciated that. And later he became mayor of Lausanne, a city of 250,000 inhabitants, where he did also an excellent job. And he remained there for 15 years. But the virus of green philosophy was present in the group of OR, or other people who also went to politics. My secretary also became a specialist also of ecology, and when she left the EPFL, she was engaged in that party. And the same happened to Jean-Claude Rochat, who finished as finance director of the city of Lausanne and remained there for 4 years at least, and stopped his PhD to go to politics, where he remained. So I've lost many people because of the emergence of green parties, but these people have found their way outside, and it's good also that way, at least for them. So.
Were you not tempted to also be affiliated to the Green Party?
No, I have nothing against, but I had an interesting position. I like to see new students coming every year, and I wanted to continue research, even sometimes on green topics. But
Dominique, you attended the very first Euro conference in 1975. What memories do you have of that event?
That's true that I am among the few survivors of that period, in fact. What I remember is that it was in Brussels in winter, bad weather, cold outside, so people attended all sessions. And that was what the organizers wanted. But we felt that something important was happening, to see these 10 countries ready to sign something, starting collaboration in operations research, organizing plans for next conferences, creating a new journal which is still around, and working groups which still are meeting every year, more than once sometimes. So we felt that it was important, and the man who did all that was Jean-Pierre Brans, who is from Belgium at the VUB, and he's going these days to the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Euro in Leeds, Great Britain, because he's still alive, and he's the man who prepared all that.
The journal you mentioned is EJOR?
EJOR, yes.
Yeah. So one of your first PhD students was Alan Hertz, who's now in Montreal. He became known not only for his research work, but also for publishing detective novels. Another notable PhD student of yours is Frédéric Semet, who was also a subject to guest. What was like working with them?
There are some others whom could be mentioned as well. Marino Widmer and Bernard Hayes are professors in Fribourg right now. I enjoyed seeing all these people coming with new ideas, having to develop OR. And we had the chance of having a lot of industrial companies in the neighborhood, which gave us lots of problems of practice. So we could mix theory and practice and develop new things in an ideal context. It was just great. And every year new people came, and there are many more whom I could mention, which have been doing a nice piece of work, and PhDs also who are remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is not to create sons who are similar to us and are ending as university professors. I have also lots of people who have gone to industrial careers and have done wonderful things there too, which is the goal also.
Yeah. One thing that Frédéric mentioned is that you guys never co-author a paper together during his PhD. And for some people nowadays, that will be quite odd. But in those days, that happened, right? I mean, you were not obliged to be part of the paper of the student, correct?
No, not at all. Yes, I signed papers only if I had really had a strong contribution, and I hated to sign papers just for them, even if it could have been an advantage to have a more or less a known name among the people signing the paper, but it was not my practice at all. So I left them working and signing alone their papers, which was what was correct.
Yes, it's about getting credit for what you actually deserve.
Yes. And you were mentioning Alan Hoffman, of course. He's one of the first students I had, and he was brilliant from the beginning, had lots of ideas. So we wrote a collection of papers together, but both of us had been working on the topics, and it was about graph theory and some problems of coloring, which were new and interesting. And now he's doing quite well, and I think his detective novels are successes.
Yes, absolutely. You hosted many famous researchers at EPFL over the years, leading to fruitful collaborations. Let's go over some of them, starting with your colleagues from Poland.
Yes, we had very close contacts with the group of Jacek Bladewicz, Roman Slovinsky, and Jan Węglarz, and they came to Lausanne quite often. I went to Poland also almost as often, and we wrote a lot of papers on some special machine scheduling problems, in particular the multiprocessor scheduling problems. You have a problem of machines and tasks to do, and some of these tasks require that a lot of processors are free at the same time and should be used simultaneously. So this gives a kind of problem for which we don't have the classical methods. So we had to start something new, and apparently it happens this in the case of testing electronic components in various electronic systems. So this was a field of research which lasted for a long time. And after that, the group of Poznan became specialists in computational biology. And this is the reason why we had also some papers on DNA graphs, which were using the method developed for the multiprocessors in a different context. One could also mention that Wiesław Kubiak was part of this group at the beginning, and I also have been working a lot with him on these problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you even got an honorary degree from Poznan University.
Yes, that's true. And when you visit the place very often, that's the end, normally.
You also collaborated with the late Peter Hammer and other colleagues on the connection between graph theory and pseudo-Boolean optimization, right?
Yes. So Peter Hammer, I met him, as you mentioned, in '69 in the NATO conference in the south of France, as the others. And the contacts have continued almost continuously until his death, I should say. So he spent 2 years as sabbatical in Lausanne, and then he went to Grenoble, which was not far from Lausanne. So we had lots of chances to work together, and we worked on graph theory and connections with pseudo-Boolean optimization, which he liked a lot. And among the people working on this, I was famous Mahadev, with whom I have still contact, and Christian Ebenegger. Christian Ebenegger, is it the right time to speak about him? I think so. He was an economist from the University of Geneva. He was teaching mathematics to architects at EPFL. He had no mathematical education at all, but he just had a good mathematical intuition. He could not prove theorems because it was not his job and his education. So he worked on examples. And some mornings he came to the office saying, I've tried 200 examples last night and they all work. And his intuitions were good. We were very impressed. He had some intuition in particular on a process which Peter Hammer calls abstraction, which consists in associating to a graph another graph whose independence number is exactly 1 unit less than before, even if you don't know the initial value of the independence number. Independence number is the number of independent vertices you can find in a graph. And we worked on this. We proved that what he was announcing was correct. The pseudo-Boolean manipulation was working all the time. And we had a paper with Christian Ebenegger on this topic with Peter Hammer. And it was a nice area of research for a long time. And this Christian Ebenegger died very early at the age of 50 by a heart attack or so. But he managed to have a paper with Chvátal. And because of that, Christian Ebenegger, the economist, is at distance 2 from Erdős in the graph of the publications in common. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Tell me about your unexpected connection with a French professor of 18th century literature who specialized in Diderot.
Yes, this person I met in some congresses in France. His name was Jean Mayer. He was a specialist of French literature, 18th century, as you say. And he was an extremely nice person, a humanist. And he was deeply interested in mathematics. And in opposition to Christian Ebenegger, he could write mathematical proofs because he wanted to be a mathematician, I guess, but his family encouraged him to do classical studies and to study humanities. So he could not. But he has been working in particular on the 4-color problem. He has published some papers with the famous people who gave the first proof by computer, Appel and Haken. There's a paper signed by Jean Mayer, Appel and Haken about this problem. And he, in particular, wrote one of the shortest papers they had in the Journal of Combinatorial Theory, which consists just of 1 sentence and 3 figures. It was to show that the edges of a complete graph on 16 nodes can be partitioned into 3 planar graphs. And I can show you, I have the thing here. That's the paper, the short version. There is no long version. That's the paper itself. See.
Wow, awesome.
Besides that, he was, as I say, a nice person, and I discussed with him some problems of factorization of complete graphs in view of application in sports scheduling, and he proposed some partial solutions, and I still have his letters with a beautiful handwriting, which I keep preciously here. Unfortunately, we had no time to finish that, and he died 2 years ago at the age of 95, I guess.
Wow. I mean, it's unthinkable to have this type of exotic collaborators nowadays, but you really had a blast collaborating with these distinguished researchers with, let's say, alternative background, but with a great intuition for math, and that's what matters, right?
We should mention something about Peter Hammer at that stage also, I think, no?
Sure.
Because I've been working a lot with him. I was saying that he has a good sense of humor. In fact, he was a promoter of the concept of conflict graph. When you have pseudo-Boolean expression, you associate a vertex with each term and then you draw an edge if these terms are in conflict. They are in conflict if one contains a variable and the other contains the complement, the x and the x bar. They are in conflict. So he promoted this idea of conflict graph, and he wrote a famous paper which was called Tabu Boolean Graphistan, Stories of the 1001 Nights, which is a Boolean number when you read it like that. And this is an explanation of what the conflict graph is, and it's explained in a political concept with also fake people whose name can be recognized if you knew the politics of these days when the paper was published. It's fantastic to read even now. So.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, we don't have room, let's say, for this type of initiatives nowadays, I believe. But in those days, I think people were a little bit more wild, maybe, at least with a deep sense of humor. And I think we lack this nowadays.
But I'm sure we could not publish such papers today,
Yeah, unfortunately.
Big complaints and yeah.
Yeah, I know. So you did not directly collaborate with Claude Berge, a legend in graph theory, but you developed a special relationship with him. What can you share about him and your friendship?
I met Claude the first time also in '69, the NATO Institute, and I talked about equitable colorings with him, and he's the one who saw the last version of one of my first papers on unimodular hypergraphs, so introduced me to hypergraphs, and we had scientific contact with that. Besides that, we had context of friendship. He came to my place quite often. We visited his apartments in Paris. He is a specialist of tribal art. His apartment is full of statues coming from the New Guinea and other exotic countries. He's a sculptor also, and he's a member of the ULIPO, the Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, which is an association of people working on writing text with strange constraints, like not using the letter E, like Georges Perec did, and writing poems who have a variable length by interchanging the end of the verses. You can change the length of the poem. So he did lots of crazy things. And what is nice is that he had quite correspondence with Raymond Queneau, this famous writer, who wrote Zazie dans le métro, in particular, Zazie in the metro. I don't know if it's translated in English that way, but I had access to all this correspondence, and they raise also mathematical questions. They use mathematics to create constraints for new types of poems, which is very impressive. And we talked about that quite often to Claude Berge. In fact, when he came to Lausanne last time, it was a few months before his death, he gave a talk entitled Mathematics and Literature, and he explained some of these constraints and what was the connection with literature and mathematics to create literature using mathematical constraints. So it's a unique personality. I'm glad to have met him, and he has been quite helpful in helping me for my first publications. I was stupid. I should have asked him to sign with me, and I would have had a collaboration in written form with Claude Berge, but I didn't ask that, and he was not proposing that himself. But now I realize it's a mistake. Yeah. So if I have some regrets to express, this is one regret.
Yeah, he was a true Renaissance man for sure, and you have access to his archive, right?
Yes, I had a chance to take pictures of almost everything he had. His wife, whom I visited after his death, gave me access to all that, and I don't know. These documents may be now in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, probably. But at least I have copies of almost everything, and it's very interesting to see these exchanges between asking mathematical questions which are not trivial at all sometimes.
Yes. And viewers and listeners interested in hearing more about Claude Berge are welcome to check out the Subject to episode with the legendary Vašek Chvátal. By the way, you and Vašek are co-authors, right?
Yes. we are co-authors by accident. In fact, with Mahadef, we had the papers on some class of perfectly orderable graphs, which we submitted to a journal. And a few months after, we got a letter from the editor saying that one of the referees had seen the paper and he found it very nice, but he had ideas to extend the procedure a bit further and to get easily new results which could be added to the paper. And he asked us whether in such a case we would be willing to accept him as a co-author. And in which case they would give us the name, because we didn't know who it was at that time, of course, because this is always anonymous. And we said, of course, yes. And then we learned that it was Vašek and Qin Huang, and both were co-authors of our paper, which was greatly improved by this collaboration with Vašek and Qin.
Yeah. That also makes you Erdős too, right?
Yes.
Nice. And what about your collaboration with Fred Glover in the 80s?
Okay, so Fred Glover also spent a sabbatical in Lausanne, and he came several times after that. And at that period, he was developing the famous Tabu Search. And we had a group of people like Eric Taillard and Alain Hertz who were willing to use it in various contexts. So we developed first a formalization of this Tabu Search, and then we had papers on various fields of application, because you cannot apply it directly. You have to change the problem or to modify it slightly so that Tabu Search does apply. Or we can also modify the Tabu Search to make it fit better the problem we want to solve. So that's essentially what we did with Fred Glover, and we got excellent results for the classical problems of graph theory, like the maximum independent set, graph coloring, and others like that, with the Tabu Search. And it was a pleasure to have Fred Glover with us, because he was very helpful in developing all this, of course, and he had new ideas to improve the method, to change it. And besides that, he loved mountain hiking, which we all practiced at that time. So we had lots of fun with him, even in the mountains, even writing papers in the mountains sometimes. Yeah.
Fantastic. You met all these people in 1969, and years after, you ended up collaborating with some of them. And it should have been just very special for you, right? The feeling of interacting and exchanging ideas with all these great minds. And I mean, which resulted in also you being one of the great minds of our field. So brilliant.
Well, it was great to be in the center of Europe without being European, I should say, but we were in an ideal position. Lots of people were traveling to Switzerland. They were keen on visiting Switzerland. And we had many more for the sabbatical, no? We did not mention Michel Balinski also spent some time in Lausanne for working on apportionment problems. And in fact, I had a thesis on this apportionment problem, which was done while Michel Balinski was there. So.
Yeah, great names, great names. You also developed strong connection with several researchers in Paris, correct?
Yes. Paris is very close, so I worked with the people in the LAMSAD at the Université Paris-Dauphine. Bernard Roy was the head of this lab. So I worked with him, with Vangelis Pascos, Bruno Escoffier, Jérôme Monod, and some others. We extended the colorings. We called things hypo-colorings or pseudo-colorings or whatever. And all these modifications of the coloring problems were made to fit some scheduling context better than the usual colorings would have done. So I had some papers with these people. And beside that, I was also very often at the CNAM, Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers, where with Marie-Christine Costa and Christophe Picoulot, we worked on blockers transversal for problems of reliability in graphs when the edges are subject to break down. And this also led us to study some problems of tomography, which were not so far from school timetabling. In terms of 0-1 matrices, it was similar, so we could use some ideas of school timetabling in these context of tomography, reconstruction of images. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned all these collaborations, but I think it's worth mentioning that you wrote many papers as sole author, even publishing multiple papers in mathematical programming, for example, just having you as an author. So, I mean, you really balance between, doing your own work and contributing and collaborating with other authors, which is also something that is not that common nowadays, I would say. But still, I mean, it seemed to have worked really well for you, right?
Yes, but that's probably a mistake, no? As Mike Florian explained me someday, that when you write a paper with several authors, the impact is the same, just you have your name and the name of others. So all count for one and not for a fraction. So it's worth for your CV to have papers with more authors. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you got the message because I actually wanted you to mention that. And Mike Florian is such a nice guy. As I mentioned, I had the chance to interview him.
Yes, I've listened to that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to hear.
I've listened to Vašek, I've listened to Frédéric Semet, I've done almost a collection. Yeah.
Wow, that's an honor. I'm really happy to know that. And when and how did you start working on sports scheduling?
Okay, that was by chance again, with contacts we had with the Swiss Hockey League. They came to us and they said, well, we have a special structure of schedule which is needed because these people playing hockey in Switzerland were semi-professionals. They were working during the week and they could play during the weekend. But during the week, they needed to have a game on Tuesday evening, but this game could not be far away from their home cities. So we had to find schedules where Switzerland could be divided into two parts, and during the week we played each team within its own part, and the weekend they could go to visit the other part. And this kind of schedule had not been used before. The classical method just have not taken this constraint into account, so we had to develop something, and it worked, and they were happy. But at the same time, this appeared in the newspapers that EPFL had constructed the schedules of the Swiss Hockey League, and some people wrote to the president of EPFL at the time to complain that they were using the money of the taxpayers for doing games like constructing schedules for sports, which has nothing to do, it's not what we are expecting from a serious institution like EPFL. So things have changed. President of EPFL, I think, did not even answer. And now the literature shows that there are lots of people in many institutions working on these problems, which are more difficult than one thinks, and are subject to bringing a lot of money to the clubs if they are well solved.
What a crazy story. Yeah, I mean, people complaining that it's waste of time, putting effort in developing a schedule for a sports event. But fortunately, time showed that solving these type of problems are extremely relevant. And OR is applied to solve many problems in the context of sports nowadays, and which is very good. Dominique, you have done so many things in terms of research, but I would like to hear what you think are your main scientific contributions.
Okay, if I had to give a concise answer, I would say that my main work has been to establish connections between graph theory and scheduling. More concretely, about the coloring problems, the chromatic theory, and the scheduling, which amounts to sometimes coloring some graphs or hypergraphs, which this topic is called normally chromatic scheduling. So I think I've made all my efforts to make these links more explicit and to use the techniques of graph by extending the models if needed to solve new scheduling problems which were not solved in a satisfactory way before. So this is a short version of what I've been doing all my life.
You're certainly very humble. I mean, you were concise, but in practice, the impact of those contributions were just amazing. In 1980, you organized an interesting and somewhat exotic meeting on graph theory alongside Pierre Hansen, who sadly passed away very recently. Could you talk a bit about the event and also share a few words about him?
Yes, of course. This meeting was organized in the castle of Cerisy-la-Salle in Normandy. It's a beautiful place where they usually have meetings of philosophy, so a lot of famous people have been there for their congresses. It was the first time that we did something about OR and graphs in particular. So we had invited a collection of people coming from different horizons. We had architects, we had engineers, we had painters, we had people from biology and zoology studying networks of the mice have outside. And they all discussed together, they presented what they were doing, and we had long discussions about the use of graphs and the future of graph theory. Graphs were not so popular at that time, and we had even to speak about graphs on the French TV, explaining what a graph was and that it was not a game, but it could be useful. And Pierre Hansen was with me, the editor of the volume which appeared after, which was called A Look on Graph Theory. So Pierre Hansen, I've been working with him since years. We have been essentially playing on games which had to do with the bounds of the chromatic number. We extended some work of Bernard Roy, and we did not work for a long time consecutively together, but we met from time to time and we wrote papers each time. So, and what I should say that we worked on the different papers of Bernard Roy, and we managed in a book to translate into French medieval language one of the theorems of Bernard Roy, which we attributed to the Chevalier de Bireuil, because the Americans used to call Bernard Roy when they name. And it was published like that. It's a nice old French style, and the theorem is given, and the rhymes are working, and the verses are there in perfect shape. So Pierre Hansen had also a good sense of humor, and I appreciated that, and we have been playing quite a lot together. So besides that, he was a living bibliography on any kind of field you could talk of. He knew the literature, he had read all that, he could find the references in his head. It was very, very impressive. And until the end, he kept his head finding everything, and as if he had read everything which appeared in the world. So
yeah, that seems almost like he has an eidetic memory to keep track of all that information. So, speaking of academic events, it seems that the workshop was named after the title of one of your presentations. How did that happen?
Well, there is a nice house in Italy called Villa Vigoni, where they used to have scientific meetings between Germany and Italy. And they organized a few years ago a meeting about combinatorial optimization. I was invited there, and I did not know exactly what I would be saying, so I proposed the title of my talk, Models and Algorithms for Planning and Scheduling Problems. And then my paper was accepted, and nothing happened until I arrived to the meeting, and I got the leaflet announcing the program, and I saw that Models and Algorithms for Planning and Scheduling Problems had become the title of the meeting, and in the program there was my talk with exactly the same name. So they liked my title so much that they kept it. So these meetings are called the MAPSP meetings. They had recently their 17th meeting, and it's still continuing. So I've never been invited again because I didn't want to change the title a second time, but I have left something with my unique presence at the first meeting of this MAPS society.
I love your sense of humor. That's again yet another brilliant story. And Dominique, you were president of EURO from 1987 to 1998. What were your main initiatives while holding that role?
Well, I always suffered from not being able to understand lots of talks at the conferences because they were not in my fields and I was not able to understand what was going on. So I thought that tutorials were important, but tutorials, they were given sometimes, but they were slightly despised. And so I tried to convince people that a good tutorial is as useful and as valued as a research presentation. And even a Nobel Prize could be invited to give a tutorial. That would be the best way of encouraging interdisciplinarity in our field and to avoid having too many barriers between the sub-areas of OR. So I fought for that, and now it seems that the tutorials are becoming more and more common, and people are not ashamed of giving a tutorial. They don't feel like a young lecturer which was given a lecture in a room far away from the center with just a few participants. These tutorials are followed by many people, and I think it's a good thing, which I hope will last in these meetings.
Yeah, great initiative for sure. And what is the story behind the creation of the European chapter on combinatorial optimization? Or should I say European club?
Yes, it started like that. But with Alexander Rinoikan and Catherine Ruckerol, we decided to create a new group of people meeting to discuss combinatorial optimization problems. This group was going to become later a Euro working group on this topic here. But we decided to call it European Club for combinatorial optimization, just to get the name Ecole, which was nice, at least in Italian. So the goals were to meet in nice places and to invite only nice people. So the first meeting was in Paris. We had a night session on the top of a tower in the University of Jussieu with 4 sides view on Paris by night. The second one was in Venice. The classroom had a balcony on the Grand Canale, so it was beautiful, and it continued like that. One was in Dubrovnik and so on. But people did not like the name European Club, and we had some complaints from participants who could not get refunded by their own university because they wanted to attend the meeting of a certain club, a European club. So that was not acceptable for administration of a university. So we had to change the name to European Chapter on Combinatorial Optimization, just to keep the name ECHO. And since then it's called European Chapter, which is less nice, but more useful for them.
I love the effort to keep the acronym there, ECHO, just, to please maybe the Italian folks.
Well, they like the acronym, no? They have a PATAT group of
Conference on Timetable.
It's an automated timetable, yes, and they have a popcorn festival, prominent open problems of combinatorial optimization and related networks. Popcorn festival.
Yes. I can be pretty obsessed with acronyms too. So I perfectly understand. So between 1990 and 2000, you were the Vice-President of EPFL. And although you had to slow down your research activities, you still published some papers during that period, including one with Alan Hoffman, who was highly influential on you in terms of mathematical elegance, right?
Yes. I met him not too often physically. First one was in Urbino at a meeting about, of course, combinatorial optimization. And we discussed a bit about different problems, and I admired his sense of concision and his will to reach as much elegance as possible in the presentation of the results we had. His slides were not always elegant. They were handwritten, and he was fighting with his slides. But the papers he wrote were beautiful, and we discussed quite often about that. And he taught me that a good problem was a problem where one could find either a solution or a certificate that no solution exists. That was the most elegant way of solving a problem. So this does not work for coloring problems, for instance, but for others it does. So we've managed to have a paper together with solution, procedure, or production of a certificate that no solution exists, related to some timetabling problem with constraints of availability. I don't enter into the details. So it was perfect, and we finished this paper a few years after. And now, as I was saying, I'm thinking of Alan Hoffman quite often, and whenever I write a paper, his presence helps me to try to be as elegant as possible, which is not always possible when I write something in the final version.
Wow.
So he has been a great influence on me, although we did not meet too often. But we have been, of course, exchanging mails for years. But
yes.
Yeah.
And yet another name to your extensive list of distinguished co-authors. And Dominique, I know you already mentioned something about it, but what role have the Swiss mountains played in your academic life?
They played an important role, I should say, because just many conferences were organized in the mountains. People like the mountains, they do come, and because it's in the mountains. And sometimes the air of the mountains is quite fruitful to help you to write a paper correctly. So we had a paper which was written in a mountain cabin. How would you say that? These small houses far away, very high. It's not a lodge, it's not comfortable at all, but it's... So we managed to write such a paper about the edge coloring of trees with cardinality constraints, something. So we were 6 or 7 people working on this in this cabin, and the paper came out and it was published. I remember that was a cabin, and it was written 3,000 in front of the building. And there were some participants who were not used to the mountains, and they were afraid when they realized that the altitude was not given in feet, but in meters. In some meters, they never went so high in their life, and so they didn't like it at all. And also, I have a chalet in the mountains where some people came, and Fred Glover and Ed Silver and myself wrote a paper in this chalet, looking at the mountains and the sun, and it was published also.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
mountains are quite present, and nowadays are still having lots of meetings. Euro has some institutes in the mountains when it's in Switzerland, so it's a basic tool of writing papers in Switzerland.
Yes, so you really benefited from that geographical advantage of yours.
Yes.
You officially retired in 2007, but you never stopped working, did you?
In fact, I never started working, I should say, because I've been doing all my life what I wanted. No one has ever given me orders, says you should study this or this. People who tried to prevent me from constructing games or schedules for the Hockey League did not succeed. I continued anyway. So I will continue doing whatever I like forever, and the academic system is good for that.
Yeah, fantastic.
I'm not going to stop working because I don't know what working is, I should say.
Yes, very inspiring, Dominique, really. And tell me about your term as president of IFORS from 2010 to 2012. Did you also advocate for tutorials as you did when you were president of EURO?
Oh, sure. You have to be consistent in your life. But what I remember is one thing which was very impressive, because they invited John Nash to give a talk in his last years. And it was impressive to see him. He gave a talk. I'm not sure too many people understood what he was meaning, but some people even managed to raise questions at the end of the talk. He answered. I don't remember what was the answer. But as soon as that was finished, John Nash was a real movie star. Lots of people jumped to the stage and wanted to get pictures with with him, it was very impressive, and he was kind enough. He let all these people do that, although it must be very boring for him. But
including you, right? I know you guys have a photo together.
That was the official one. They had to do it, yes. But after there were really crowds around him. We did not order any policemen, but it would have been quite useful to have some organization, because it was a mess as I've never seen. What else I did in IFORS is that I organized a president's dinner in Melbourne Aquarium. And the idea was that people should see something unusual. And I said, there's no problem, since you are used to living among sharks anyway.
Yeah. Brilliant.
People liked it.
Yeah, you're an expert in adding that touch to make things more, let's say, relaxed and fun, right? And you mentioned the president's dinner. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the last one in Santiago, Jenny Leung, who I had a chance to interview, and she was the one who made the connection between the two of us. She invited me to join the meeting, and I had a chance to meet great people there, including, for example, Brian Denton, which I ended up interviewing later too, and other folks. And could you talk about your involvement in an initiative connecting EPFL and Africa in the field of AI?
Yes, since I am retired, I am a member of some council foundations, and I've in particular a foundation which has money to support projects between Africa and EPFL. And what they are paying is studies related to artificial intelligence. And in fact, we are inviting students from several countries in Africa, and we send some people from EPFL to Africa. So the goal of this project is, for one, to optimize the vaccination campaigns using the data they have and artificial intelligence, the resistance to antibiotics, which is very important, since there will be millions of deaths if nothing is done until the year 2050. It's by tens of millions of deaths which we are going to happen if we don't do anything. And then they have also to develop systems for educating the Red Cross employees when they arrive on a scene where the tragedy has taken place and everything is destroyed and people have to be helped. So they need to develop systems where there is a robot answering questions. The new collaborators of Red Cross ask questions that the robot is answering in an intelligent way. And that's very impressive, the way it works. So this is the kind of things which keep me busy while I'm retired. But I continue working also on sports scheduling, because you cannot stop. Once the virus is there, you have to continue, and there are still problems to solve. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very interesting project, and I hope Africa benefits from that research effort. And they really deserve better luck, right?
Yes, and EPFL also takes advantage of that, because they have a good system of recruitment in Africa. They have good institutions also there. And some of these people are so good that they are kept for PhD in EPFL. So we have two now which came last year and which were kept here,
Yeah, fantastic. So Dominique, I know you enjoy promoting humor in mathematics. That became clear in this conversation. How do you manage to do that?
I don't know, but what I know is that, I quote somebody here, conditions for success, it's to have first a reasonable amount of work, a sufficient quantity of doubt, and as much humor as possible. End of quotation. I don't know where it comes from, but I think it's a good method to work. So humor is necessary. I think humor is an interesting intellectual attitude, because it forces you to take a step backward and look at what you are doing. And things may look ridiculous, and you can do some humor about that. But also it's a way of seeing, is what I'm doing having some meaning? Can I extend it? Can I generalize it? And humor is the tool which may help to look at that from far away. Now, you were alluding to some humor. In fact, I was asking myself, what kind of message do you leave to your students when you have finished? And recently at the conference, I was surprised to see a not so young professor coming to me, and he said me, "You told me something years ago which have motivated me to work during all my career, which is not finished yet, but up until now." And say, "Well, what can I have taught you? I did not imagine that. You gave a talk years ago as a after dinner talk about how to write a paper and how does the referee system work. And you told us that if you want to be someday the one who can refuse and reject the papers of others, you have to start by working hard." And he said, "That has kept me busy all the time. I've followed your advice for years." It's a bit sad to see that this is a message you leave to others, but I found it pretty funny also. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about that game that you guys play at EPFL?
The game, well, we had a game which is practiced for many years now, of giving at the beginning of each talk to the person who is in charge of presenting something, a list of keywords. Is that what you want to know?
Exactly.
A list of keywords which they have to introduce in the talk in such a way that it looks as natural as possible. And we played this game, and in fact, when I gave my final official lecture at EPFL, they also gave me a list of things which I had to introduce in the thing. And it has to be nicely introduced so that people don't notice it, as I was saying. And they attend the talk, the people who propose the keywords, and they count that and they check and give a appreciation, at the end. Yeah. So, for instance, the words which were given to me were an old watchmaker, had to talk about a beauty salon, a fundamentalist Protestant, a constipated belly, a pile of noodles, brined and heavily smoked pork belly.
Wow, that's a very difficult game.
And well, it took me an hour and a half, but I could put all of them in the system. And well, it's a stupid game, but it keeps people awake. And from now, they listen to seminars much better than before because they have to watch until these words are coming.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I think people should adopt that strategy to keep people more focused while attending, presentations. Yeah. I mean, I understand that when we do science research, everything has to be correct, serious. But whenever there is an opportunity to fit in, some humor and fun things, I think we should do it because it makes life more interesting without compromising the seriousness of the research and scientific work.
I don't know if that's the message I would like to leave for the next generation. It's a bit of fun, and that's all. It's not so important. But
yeah. I mean, at least I find humor very important. So I'm all in for that initiative. And since we're talking about humor, it seems that lying it's also important, right?
Yes, I had in a talk explained what were the qualities for a good applied mathematician, and it was surprising to see that being pessimistic was a good quality because this allows you to think of the worst case, never forget the worst case, which never happens in practice, but
yes.
So you have to be pessimistic.
Yeah, my wife would have been a great mathematician or a computer scientist, at least in complexity theory and proving theorems, if she had followed that path, because she's really good at picturing the worst case.
Okay, that's one thing. And then lying, it's incredible, but lying is the best exercise of modeling you can imagine. Because when you lie, you have to create your own reality, which is not what really happened. And it has to be consistent and to be logical. And then when a good liar is somebody who has really imagined whatever has happened in his way and whatever will happen. And isn't that the best exercise of modeling something which may be real or not?
Yeah. So in theory, we lie all the time, right?
Perhaps, yes.
Dominique, I know you already mentioned that you regret not signing a paper together with Claude Berge, but do you have any other regrets?
Yes, I have one. That you didn't ask me earlier to give this interview because I would have remembered many more anecdotes.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I think I should have done it a couple of years ago.
It's a joke. No, I have regrets not to have been able to collaborate more with all these people, those fantastic people whom I had a chance to meet during my professional life. So I would have had more joint papers if I had known that.
Yes, but you did just great. But I understand the feeling. And what are your plans for the future?
Well, first to survive as long as possible. And then I will continue. I want to finish a few things on the sports scheduling. In fact, I'm working now with Sebastian Urrutia, with whom we wrote the book which came out 2 years ago. And we spent 2 weeks of hard work. And when you continue and start working again like that, you want to continue. You cannot stop suddenly. So we still open new problems, and we want to solve some of those, as many. So I want to continue.
Yes, very exciting. And would you like to say a few words to our young audience?
Who am I to give messages for the young audiences of the future? What I would just say modestly is that I liked working with students because they bring something new. And in fact, new ideas on old problems are much better than the opposite. That's why it's so fruitful to work with young students. And the message is you have to go back to the sources to read classical work, take old books of graph theory, whatever, read that again. You may find new ideas, new way of expressing these things. And it's always fruitful to know the classics and to study them. I have a good example for that. I had a chance to work, without knowing it, on the two-machine open shop problem. And I managed to do some things on very special classes of graphs, like interval coloring, things like that. And it turns out that this gave the simplest algorithm known for solving this problem of two-machine, much simpler than the famous Gonzalez-Sunny and all the other things which are more complicated. It amounts to show that any problem with n jobs can always be reduced to 3 jobs at all. And then the 3 jobs are easy to commute. The algorithm is linear in n number of jobs. And this came just because we studied this well-known problem again and again and found that. In fact, we had a paper with Vasily Struzevich, which was called 2 is hard, 3 is easy. And we showed that paper that if we reduce all the jobs to 2 jobs, it can be NP hard to solve the problem. But if we reduce to 3, which is always possible, it's becoming easy. So it's a proof that it's, as I was saying, worth knowing the classics and reading the basic ideas to bring new contributions.
Yeah. All right. So Dominique, I had a wonderful time talking to you. You are a true scholar, a person with a fantastic sense of humor, which I really appreciate. I'm so thankful for you sharing these amazing anecdotes, of course, your life stories, and I'm sure you're going to inspire the youngsters out there. And I wish I had met you earlier, for sure. I wish I had the chance to get to know you a few years ago, but it's never too late. So once again, I cannot thank you enough. It's been wonderful, really.
Thank you. I feel very honored to have been interviewed in this way. I hope it's understandable and that people will enjoy listening to it, as I enjoyed listening to all the others which you have already made. And I've quoted a few of them, including Mike Florian, whom I've also listened to recently.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing all that. It's a great job, and I appreciate what you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your words. And if you are interested in visiting Brazil, just let me know. And if I have the chance to go to Switzerland one of these days, I will drop you a line.
I will show you even the mountains, yes.
Ah, okay. Okay, Dominique, merci. Thank you very much. Take care. Stay healthy. And I'm looking forward to seeing your papers on sports scheduling and your other endeavors in the next years. So
thank you very much. Thank you, Anand. Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye, Dominique.
Bye.
Bye.